Hi there, this is Emily Fort with the Homeschool Freedom Coalition. This is a hard video to cut. I actually cut it 3 different times yesterday, and I'm going to try again today, and hopefully this one makes it somewhere off my camera. As everybody knows, 2 days ago, Charlie Kirk was murdered in Utah, and this space has just absolutely been flooded with commentary, and everybody has a take, everybody has their thoughts on it. It affected millions of people. Especially, I've heard, even here at HFC staff, I have heard from some of our gals that their teenage kids, their late teens, they really looked up to Charlie Kirk and saw him as an older brother, someone leading them into what a courageous Christian American looked like in this time that we live in. And so it's obviously personal for a lot of our young people, but even as homeschool moms, a lot of our students are dealing with it. And so I wanted to talk very quickly about what I think homeschoolers can take from the death of Charlie Kirk, the murder of Charlie Kirk. A couple of things. Obviously, Charlie Kirk was a strong Christian, and anytime a Christian is vocal and good at selling the idea, right? Anytime that they're able to package it in a way that people really understand it and really see, the beauty of it, and not just see it as this joke, which is what it's treated as in the school system, your sky daddy, belief system. They're taught to mock and ridicule it, but when people see someone like Charlie living out his faith in such a powerful, dynamic, impressive way, that's perceived as a threat to the people that don't want people to turn to God for their strength and their morality and their sense of purpose in the world. And so that, I think, is well established, and a lot of voices have already talked to that space. And so that's not necessarily what I'm here to talk about today. One thing I wanted to point out to homeschoolers, which I hope is immediately obvious to them like it was to me, is that what Charlie Kirk was so hated for doing was he could undo years of indoctrination in an afternoon. Students who had been carefully taught a specific worldview to make them a specific type of person, to follow a specific ideology and believe certain truths about the world, those aren't easy to make. It takes years and years and years of repeating the same lies and the same half-truths before you can get a student to believe that stuff. Charlie Kirk's ability to just cut right through it very quickly, very efficiently and effectively, that is what made him such a target. Because keep in mind, a lot of people, literally millions of Americans, share Charlie's ideas. We know now how many people were impacted by his ideas, but a lot of us already shared them. A lot of us are pro-life. A lot of us are pro-freedom. A lot of us, share similar thoughts in economic policy and things like that. None of us are getting killed for it usually, right? The reason Charlie had to be stopped by these people was because he was so effective at undoing the indoctrination. And I want to tie this to homeschooling very quickly. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I was homeschooled. My siblings were all home. I have 10 siblings, all homeschooled. All of us are homeschooling. We have 44 kids between us, I think, homeschooling. So it's like, in the 90s and early 2000s, homeschoolers just wanted to be left alone, right? They wanted the government to pay no attention to them, to leave us alone, don't regulate us, don't legislate us, pretend we don't exist. Okay, that's what we wanted. We aren't going to poke the bear won't poke us. That's the whole philosophy. Well, Charlie Kirk didn't buy into that anymore. He said, we need to go challenge these people's way of thinking where they are. We need to go talk to them and confront their ideologies respectfully and kindly, of course, but we can't just hide anymore and hope they leave us alone. And I want to draw this full circle for homeschoolers. Homeschooling at its heart fundamentally pulls kids out of the system where they are indoctrinated into a worldview of compliance with the state or of compliance with certain ideologies. And so just like Charlie Kirk, he wasn't a threat because of what he believed, because a lot of people already believe that. He was a threat because he made new believers. He undid indoctrination and made new believers of his worldview. That is a dangerous threat to the system. And so while we all just wanted to be ignored in the 90s and early 2000s, homeschooling, that era has passed, because just like Charlie Kirk's ideas weren't so much the problem as the size of his audience and the number of people he was influencing and unindoctrinating, similarly, homeschooling could get away with going under the radar in the 90s and early 2000s, but now we have reached a point of critical mass where we will never, ever fly under the radar again. Never, okay? I promise you, I've been in this world of homeschooling my entire life. If you want to put a date on the day that homeschooling can never again tell itself that it will fly under the radar, put that date on the death of Charlie Kirk, okay? Charlie Kirk represented an existential threat to the system because he unindoctrinated people on a large scale. His videos getting tens of millions of views over years and years on end. He was too effective. Similarly, homeschooling has been too effective. Homeschooling has gotten too many kids out of the system that's supposed to teach them to be compliant, to be helpless, to rely on the state for everything, to reject God, to reject their country, to reject their parents or their family, to reject all the things that made America what it was, what we hope it will be again. And so the critical mass point, was not accomplished, overnight. But I'm telling you, absolutely, I am confident in this to my very soul. The amount of legislation that is coming for homeschooling in the coming years is absolutely astronomical. Okay, what's happened is, just like Charlie Kirk, in some ways, we have unindoctrinated a bunch of people, but now we're reaching a critical mass. Now we're reaching too many kids too quickly. And with the passage of school choice in huge states like here in Texas, that has at least 600,000 homeschoolers, and then we have Tennessee and Idaho and other red states like Florida and Arizona and stuff, already have versions of school choice. The exponential growth of homeschooling in the next 5 years I cannot even. If currently homeschooling is 6% of students in America, I would bet that in 5 years will be a solid 10%, just because of these school choice bills that have financially paved the way for families to leave the system they already want to leave. And so as we represent a bigger and bigger percentage, right, recognize that we don't just represent dollars that have left the system. Of course, they hate that. They hate that every student is taking $10,000 to $15,000 in funding away from the local school district, from the state and federal government. They hate that. But it's not just the numbers. It's not just money. Okay? It's also the ideological break that homeschooling represents. There are now, just like Charlie Kirk was leading millions of young people out of indoctrination and into a different worldview, homeschooling is also leading millions of students out of their control. Even if you use their curriculum, even if you do, K-12 curriculum at home, you're still getting away from a lot of the tough, just to be very explicitly clear, I don't recommend that, and I hope you don't, and I hope that you can find an alternative. But even if that's the type of homeschooler that you've come in as, that's just the type you are right now, we're still happy to have you in homeschooling. But the point is, even if that's the type, even if you use their same curriculum, you're still going to end up with a different student, because the peer pressure element, the bullying, the assault, the exposure to drugs, the exposure to illicit images on cell phones, all these things. And people will say, oh, kids will be exposed to that anyway. Yeah, but when you got them at home and you're 3 feet from them, you have a lot more say, right? The anxiety and the depression and all these things that kids are dealing with in school, that is going to be so different. A kid who is at home with their parents is so much more likely to see a purpose to their life other than this endless, school system of nothingness where you're not important and you came from ooze and you don't matter, and morality is fluid and arbitrary, and your gender is fluid and arbitrary, and all of reality is fluid and arbitrary, and you can just do whatever you want as long as you don't get caught, and life is pointless and meaningless. It's like, well, if you raise a kid away from those people, you're going to get a different result. And that is why I think homeschooling represents an existential threat, just the exact same way that Charlie Kirk did. Hopefully, as millions of people leave the government school system in the coming years, the goal of the Homeschool Freedom Coalition is to gather those people and coalesce them into an effective grassroots fighting force. And I don't mean physical, I mean political. Because that's another key thing that Charlie believed that homeschoolers share, is the idea that our system of government is the only check and balance from mass violence. Our legislative process, that we can impact what happens to bills that hit the legislature by contacting our legislators and by working in campaigns and working in primaries. It's that idea. That's the thing that keeps us from devolving into a third world, barbarian horde. And so homeschoolers have always had such a love for the Constitution and a love for our founding fathers and a love for the beautiful system that was created, right? And so it's like, if those are some of the core beliefs that Charlie Kirk shared, and those are some of the core beliefs that homeschooling shares, recognize that we will face the same enemies and the same amount of opposition, okay? We're not going to get away. And I'm just going to I mean, as long as I am driving this home, I'm going to be very explicit. The days of taking cherry pies to Capitol buildings have to end now. That era is over. That era of floating under the radar, showing how nice we can be, how harmless we are, and I mean politically harmless, have to end. And I would argue they already have ended 2 days ago, okay? The era where you can just float under the radar and hope to be ignored. We now have such a number as homeschoolers that we represent an existential threat to their system. We will never go under the radar again, ever. I promise you. For those of you who didn't realize when we were floating through the 20 teens that we were enjoying the last few peaceful years, I'm sorry that you missed out on enjoying them. You will never see them again. We will never go through a legislative session again in the next 15 years. I promise you that you will not be worried and concerned and praying for homeschoolers in some state somewhere in this country whose rights to homeschooling are being critically attacked. I promise you that. Mark my words. This fight is just beginning for homeschooling. Now, Charlie's fight is over. He's gone to his eternal reward. It is now our opportunity to raise up our children to be the next generation of truth tellers, of truth seekers, of people that will preach the gospel boldly, if that's your faith. It's obviously mine, and I think many of the people who follow this channel. But you don't have to be a Christian to want to defend homeschooling. You don't have to be a Christian to want your kid to think free, okay? And so when these legislative bills come, when they come to regulate, test, track, trace, mandate curriculum, mandate all sorts of things, vaccines and medical procedures that you are supposed to tolerate because they tell you to, when they come for homeschooling, we need to stand together and stand up as a group and say, this is not going to happen because our children belong to us and they do not belong to the state. Their minds are not for you to mold into radical leftists. Our children belong to us, and we will train them up how we see best. In my case, it'll be in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And I think that was Charlie Kirk's goal for his children as well. And so we have to stand together. Now, here's some actions you can take today. First of all, have these conversations with your children if they're old enough to process the things that we're talking about. Your teenagers probably knew who Charlie Kirk was. Talk with them about the example that he was, and a life of courage and a life of faith lived boldly. Those are good things to talk through with your students. And also look for areas where you can speak boldly, where you can get involved, where you can be a voice of truth in your local community, in your homeschool co-ops, in your, with your local legislators, whatever. Anywhere that the truth needs to be spoken boldly and loudly, Christians and especially just homeschoolers in general need to step into that space. And I think that's what Charlie would want. I never met him, obviously, but I feel like the ideological agreement between what he was trying to do in waking up young people and what homeschooling is trying to do in training up young people are so similar that I can say that. And I think most people would agree. The second thing you can do is, if you're not a member yet of the Homeschool Freedom Coalition, we exist for one purpose. We aren't here to teach people how to homeschool. There's a million blogs for that. Honestly, homeschooling is best done one-on-one with a friend. If you've got a mentor, that's the best way to do this. You don't need help on navigating, what curriculum to choose from us, because there's 50 million other curriculum, advisors out there. If you do have questions, drop them in the comments. The ladies here, we're happy to help you. But ultimately, we exist to fight bad legislation, and we believe firmly that it is coming. We think the writing was on the wall years ago. We think the date was sealed yesterday or 2 days ago. If you're not a member yet, please join the Homeschool Freedom Coalition. If you haven't signed up for our email alerts, please do that. We will keep you updated on critical bills moving in your state or in the federal government that matter to homeschoolers. We'll make it easy for you to get involved. We'll make it easy for you to connect with your legislators. We will keep you up to date on exactly what's happening, and you don't have to wonder, is this accurate? Is this, what's the real story here? So that's the second thing you can do. And the third thing you can do is just pray for our country. And I mean, I know everyone is saying this, but I think events like this kind of shock us out of our normal routine. For a lot of homeschoolers, last week was the first week of school. You know, we all started after Labor Day, the way God intended. And for a lot of us, it was just a normal, busy first week of school, you know, getting in the swing of things. And I think the murder of Charlie Kirk really was a wake-up call for a lot of people that, you know, the world isn't going to just continue on the way it is. And that while nature hikes and book reading and insect collections and all that are important, like there's a more spiritual battle going on here for the hearts and minds of our kids and for honestly, the heart and mind of our country. And so please be in prayer for true leadership, for true courage, for people who are willing to say the hard things and do the hard things and take the political heat and take the pressure. It's not fun. You know, people see what Charlie Kirk got to do traveling and debating. I can promise you with my, much more limited experience in the space he worked in, it is not as fun as it looks. It is extremely emotionally and mentally exhausting. So be in prayer that the Lord would raise up true leaders, raise up true, courageous, bold men and women to lead us, and especially to lead homeschooling into the years that come, because this is not a one and done event with what happened to Charlie. We think America, I think a lot of people I'm seeing online agree that things are not trending well and that they hope that this is a pivotal watershed moment, that the tide turns. But, we have to pray that God would restore our country that way, that he would use this event as a watershed to turn us in a good direction and not just as one more step in this inevitable decline of our country that we're watching. So I always end videos by saying some little catchy phrase. I usually say, like freedom starts at home, but I really truly mean that, not just today, but on every video. Freedom does start at home. Please stay free, stay the course, keep your kids free of the system. It matters so much more than you know.